I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the Mazda MX-30. When the MX-30 was shown to the world for the very first time, Mazda Australia were pretty coy about whether they were going to be bringing the car here. But now, this far down the track, a decision has been made. The MX-30 is here in Australia and it will be on sale in 2021. But interestingly, in two very distinct flavors, with a third following after that. First to arrive will be a petrol MX-30 with a 2-litre engine shared with the CX-30 and the Mazda 3, plus a mild hybrid system added on. Later, in winter 2021, there will be the MX-30 as we know it, battery electric, 35.5 kilowatt hour battery, a range of about 224 kilometers, zero tailpipe emissions, which is what this car was meant to be about. And then later in 2022, there's very likely to be a rotary range extender version of the MX-30. It runs on electric power, but it has a rotary gasoline engine to boost the range so you can do long distance driving without that kind of anxiety. So an interesting approach from Mazda, multiple prongs. What's important today though is that it's a very good looking car in the flesh. Design is subjective, but I like this chunky little SUV, something quite distinct for Mazda, squared off rather than curved. While the exterior is pretty dramatic, the interior is a real differentiation for this brand, and that's what we're going to check out first. Here inside the MX-30, it's a really distinctive interior, and it's one that's actually constructed from sustainable materials and also non-animal products, and that's generally a way that car interiors are going to go in the next decade in a big way. I really think that'll be a trend, and it starts with the seats, which is synthetic leather and fabric, so nice and breathable for the Australian summer. It's starting to get pretty hot here now, so an interior like this is going to make sense. Then we have stuff like recycled PET bottles up here on the top of the doors, which creates its own sort of soft touch material, as well as cork down here between the seats. 100 years ago, Mazda, what is now known as Mazda, was a cork manufacturer in Hiroshima, so that's just a little nod to the heritage of the brand there, celebrating its centenary year in 2020. There are some shared components with other Mazdas. We've got the same infotainment system as the CX-30, which runs on a similar platform to this car. Same lovely thin rim steering wheel, and the partially digital gauges run effectively the same functions, apart from the fact we have a range dial in this car instead of remaining petrol. Plus a rotary controller down here between the seats in order to control that technology. Otherwise though, it is a pretty refreshing take on a Mazda cabin. We've got a floating center console here with storage space behind it. Of course, this car doesn't have a gearbox, so it does free up this room down here effectively. Sliding armrest, storage beneath that, these clever sort of cup holder covers that open up, but then they create a tray when you don't have a cup to use. Decent sized door bins, and just a feeling of kind of light and airiness in this interior, which is pretty nice. Plus, I have the freestyle door, those rear doors propped open there to show you just kind of how expansive the cabin feels and different in flavor to a CX-30. Now, I do fit in the back seat. I'll pop in a shot of me getting in there now. It's not massive. I wouldn't want to spend too much time back there, but Mazda says most people that buy an MX-30 will be single or couple, no kids.
When the MX-30 was unveiled at last year's Tokyo Motor Show, Mazda presented the vehicle to the world as a full battery EV with the specifications that will come to Australia. That's a 35.5 kilowatt hour battery, which is small-ish for a full EV, but still a bigger battery than the Mini SE, which has a 32.6 kilowatt hour unit. Mazda Australia claim that the MX-30 will have a range of 224 kilometers on the NEDC cycle, while the WLTP claim is as low as 200 kilometers in European markets. The real test will happen when we get the MX-30 EV out onto the road to test how far it'll go in ordinary Australian driving. Charging will be available via DC, but it's limited to 50 kilowatt, much like the Mini SE. The MX-30 EV's motor produces 107 kilowatts of power and 271 newton meters of torque. Again, on the low side for an EV, but Mazda say they targeted a very familiar and normal driving experience here. The MX-30's regenerative braking is also not as strong as on some vehicles that offer true one-pedal driving. The decision to add a combustion version of the MX-30 for Australia followed an earlier move by Mazda Japan, and it's one we honestly didn't see coming. We knew there was a range extender version of the MX-30 in the works, using Mazda's rotary engine technology, and insiders suggest that car will arrive on the scene shortly, using a petrol engine operating at low RPMs to generate power for the electric motor, promising a much longer range. But the most affordable MX-30 to come to Australia will utilise an adapted version of the CX-30's 2-litre petrol engine, producing 114 kilowatts of power and 200 newton meters of torque. There will be a mild hybrid system for extended start-stop functionality, but for the most part, this is a basic petrol engine, and fuel economy will be 6.4 litres per 100 kilometres, Mazda says, a figure that, again, we'll be testing in the real world.
So that's a detailed first look at the new Mazda MX-30, which is coming to Australia next year in petrol, mild hybrid, and fully electric forms, and probably in a range extender EV form in 2022. Personally, it's a car I'm very interested to drive on our roads, particularly the fully electric version, which is really true to what the MX-30 was all about from the start, from the first time we looked at it together. Though I will be driving the petrol mild hybrid with interest as well when it arrives first up in probably March, April next year. But I'm keen to know what you think about Mazda's MX-30 strategy for Australia. Let me know down below in the comments. Is it a car you've been waiting to drive? While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.